Today, we're diving into a controversy swirling around the Supreme Court Justice Samuel Alito. Again. Recently, Rolling Stone obtained a recording that reveals Alito's candid thoughts on political polarization, the role of the Supreme Court, and his views on America's moral compass. Alito's comments shed light on his firm stance within the court's conservative faction, a stark contrast to Chief Justice John Roberts' more measured responses at the same event. We'll explore what these revelations mean for the judiciary impartiality and the broader implications for American democracy. Stay tuned as we unpack this judicial drama and its potential impact on the future on the Supreme Court. This story is from the Rolling Stone by Tessa Stewart and Tom Dickinson on June 10th, 2024. So, Cindy, I'm coming to you. How does Alito describe the possibility of compromise between opposing political sides?
He said that the views cannot be complementary. He said that it's just there is a rift that cannot be repaired, and I think that's true. I mean, conservatism, especially the conservatism we see in the U.S., it's so far removed from reality that it cannot be crossed by any political movement. So yeah, on that note, I think he's right, but he's on the wrong side of history, and he's trying to keep on the books ideas and laws that are just not relevant anymore, and that stems from a way deeper issue that the U.S. has. And I speak as a French person who's well, I'm not going. I saw them, but I know that we had our constitution rewritten. I think it's 12 or 13 times. The idea that you can rule a country with 200 and more set of laws, it's just stupid. And so you have this very old set of rules, and then you have this body that's supposed to interpret it regarding our current society. And that just doesn't work. You guys need to rewrite your constitution. There's no way around it.
Well, I think that one of the things that we discussed on previous nonprofit episodes was, and we also bring it up constantly, and I think that's one of the reasons why we are here, is to talk about separation of church and state, even though those specific words are not written in the Constitution. Thomas Jefferson did write that the Establishment Clause was specifically about building a wall to separate church and state. And as our United States have evolved, especially since we are more of a macrocosm of multiple cultures, religion, and government. So I think that one of the things that we have to keep in mind is that the Supreme Court in of themselves are supposed to be impartial. They're supposed to rule based on secular principles, not principles based on their belief systems. At least it's not supposed to be the thing that kind of rules them. And one of the things that we have seen specifically from Alito over and over again is that is not the case. It seems like that he has a very hard time being able to separate his religious beliefs from the way that he's supposed to interpret secular law. But even though that we have a 6-3 majority of conservatism on the court, it seems like that Chief Justice Roberts had a very different stance, as I talked about in the beginning of the show. So we know that Windsor, who was an activist that pretended to be a conservative, right wing, religious Catholic activist, came to both Roberts and also to Alito and asked them pretty much similar questions about, how they rule certain things, and also the importance of keeping religious beliefs in the way that you kind of look at law. And Alito was like, yeah, I agree with you. That should be definitely the thing. But Chief Justice was a bit different. Jimmy, tell us about, what your thoughts were that was such in stark contrast of Alito when it came to when Justice Roberts was asked the same questions.
Well, Justice Roberts, being somebody that maintains pretty much an ideology that I don't endorse or subscribe to, was very refreshing in his response, I have to say, because that's exactly the kind of thing that we're looking for from a Supreme Court justice that is supposed to be impartial and objective and does not have any preconceived biases, at least on display. And that's not what we got from Justice Alito. So you take the two responses from both of these Supreme Court justices, and one was, in talking about Alito first, saying that there's nothing that we can do to fix this country. We have to legislate based on religion, and we have to legislate based on the current status quo of conservative politics. On the other hand, Chief Justice Roberts feels completely the opposite, and feels as if it's his job, or every Supreme Court justice's job, to be impartial and to be objective, and to take things as they come. You shouldn't have a ruling already in mind about a case that has not come across your desk yet. And that's the kind of response that Chief Justice Roberts alluded to by saying that we have to be impartial. Justice Alito did not. And Justice Alito, what is alarming about his response is that it is in complete contrast to what the Constitution stands for. And Cindy, I understand the point of view that says, well, you got to rewrite your Constitution because your Constitution was written by a bunch of slave owners 250 years ago. Valid. However, who's going to step up and rewrite the Constitution when we've got such a stark divide in this country? Neither side wants to lose any ground to the other because that divide is so big. So there's one perspective to kind of take into consideration. In addition, I just think that the Supreme Court justices are supposed to be able to base their decisions on their expertise, and they're not able to do that. It completely goes against the Constitution when you have a perspective like Alito's.
Well, going back to that, if we're talking about perspective, let's kind of explore the historical context. So you got two justices that are seemingly very conservative, and they seem to kind of be on the same side when it comes to certain issues that come across their desk. However, you have one that is clearly belief driven, and you have another one who is, as you said, refreshingly driven by, I believe, the spirit of the Establishment Clause to be objective when it comes to how they rule, and it should be without any type of bias or preconceived notions. So now that we have both of these type of people on the court, and of course that we can say with some of the other ones that are there, possibly more on Alito's side, how is that going to show up historically? Does Roberts provide the counter, the idea that the nation is unusually polarized? Or is it that we are just not ready to actually just like move forward and be able to be objective in the way that we are actually looking at laws? Jimmy, I want you to kind of respond to that. And then Cindy, I would like for you to counter.
Yeah, well, Cindy's point that Alito is on the wrong side of history is absolutely right. I think that the two perspectives between these two Supreme Court justices show the growth, or the growth in the schism between right and left in this country. Roberts represents kind of an older value, one that's several decades older. Alito is relatively newer and represents the growth that has taken place in that schism. And when history looks back and it judges the United States and it judges the people that supported the MAGA movement, it will look at the legal and authoritative figures in our government that were willing to compromise the spirit and intent of our Constitution and really the spirit and intent of our country, right? The fabric that's going to hold us together. They were willing to compromise the country for their own personal gain, their own personal perspectives and allegiances. And that is where Alito is going to fall, where Roberts, although he might look like the rest of his tribe, was willing to work with the other tribes. And I think that is the difference.
What about you, Cindy? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I agree. There will be a difference, but in the end, I think the problem remains. The reason why I said that the Constitution needs to be rewritten is because in its current condition, the institutions are programmed to work with good faith people. And Trumpism just destroyed that. That's why he's been very effective, and it's been very, very hard to stop him because he's not doing anything in good faith.
Well, I want to just interject, not necessarily, just putting in Trumpism, because number one, we do not endorse any type of candidate that happens to be running in November. And we are not trying to actually sway anybody on how, they should vote. But I think that it's important. And even though I don't disagree with you per se, as far as the way that we possibly should be looking at the way that the Constitution is now and how it's being engaged, because it was actually saying that, hey, we're actually thinking that you're going to do the right thing, but we are seeing that because there's other interests that's involved, that's not necessarily the case. And this is something I would say was definitely before 2016, 2015, et cetera, et cetera. So, I think that keeping that in mind, how else would you see the historical context would be when we definitely have such polarizing viewpoints just on the Supreme Court alone?
Yeah, my point and where I was going to was that even Trumpism is not the issue in itself. The issue is that there is a very small majority of Christofascists, as we call them, who is trying to impose their religious view on everyone else. And this movement is just taking Trumpism as just a locomotive, and it's just a way to impose their view on everyone else. And so when history will judge that, they will realize that how could so few people impose their views on so many people, and why didn't anyone stop them? Because people claim that the US is a democracy, and I don't think it is. But in a democracy, normally, the majority is supposed to rule. And so the question will be, how is it possible for such a minority to go so high into imposing their views on everyone? And that will because there will have been people in strong positions, like the Supreme Court, like some senators, like some representatives, and that's how you go from where we are now to where the US can potentially be, which is much, much, much worse.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't disagree with that. I know that my personal worry is that we do have a minority of people that happen to be in power being influenced by another minority that's not necessarily good for the social contract of the country. And I definitely know, because we talked about it so much, about the influence of Christian nationalism or Christofascism that happens to be running so rampant in our government entities as far as even like in a institution like the Supreme Court that's supposed to be impartial. That's the main reason why this particular body of people are not elected. They are appointed, and they are supposed to be appointed and confirmed by another branch of the government, which is the legislative branch, specifically the Senate, in order for them to be separate from any type of political institution, and they can be completely influenced by the spirit and the interpretation of what the Constitution is saying or trying to say. And there have been times in our history where the Supreme Court got it right. And unfortunately, there are times, even as of late, where the Supreme Court has got it wrong. So, Jimmy, I want to ask you about Windsor, specifically this young person that happened to attend the event that is supposed to be for Supreme Court justices to kind of, schmooze and stuff like that. Even though I personally I'm of the opinion that events like this shouldn't even be a thing. I don't necessarily think that, public people should be able to get at the Supreme Court in of itself, because again, we want them to be impartial as much as possible. But what do you think her action or activism helped to reveal? And do you think that it would be something that would possibly be a good thing as far as like how we progress and go forward, knowing that these are the thoughts of the people that happen to rule on the highest court in the land?
Well, I don't know if it's going to have as much of an impact as we hope or as it should, because people are consistently proving themselves, especially people on the right in this country, that they really don't care about the good old boy system that happens with this party in particular. But, not only with this party. I mean, we should not be making celebrities or royalty out of our elected officials, but unfortunately, we just do. And there is an element of being part of the group that takes place all across the government. I have no problem with the fact that she went in there and disingenuously extracted his true opinion out of him, because he is a public figure and you should know better. When you are talking to somebody, everything is fair game. Even if you think it's off the record, there is no off the record. You are a Supreme Court justice. And yeah, they shouldn't be people that can be accessible to donors, to lobbyists, to other people with great influence, because the whole point of having a Supreme Court justice appointed for life, not elected, is to stave off that exact influence. And instead, they are just exposed to it regularly. I'm glad that she exposed the idea that this person, through his opinions, renders the Constitution, dysfunctional, rather. It cannot function effectively with him interpreting it because he lacks the ability to interpret it objectively. That is a big problem. And so I'm happy she did it. He shouldn't be surprised. There was no reasonable expectation of privacy. And it's not like, she went into his bathroom and held a microphone while he was getting out of the shower. You know what I mean? This was a public event. I just think that he's stupid. He should recuse himself from the Supreme Court, and he should step down immediately. But that's not going to happen.
Yeah, no. Remember, we already have issues specifically with Alito being called to recuse himself from certain judgments, certain cases like January 6th, like the immunity case that's going to be coming up, and he's just not doing it. And it's quite unfortunate that that's not the case because, as you said, he has proven himself not to be impartial. But, Cindy, I want to come to you because, something that Robert said to Windsor was pretty interesting. He said that the idea of the Supreme Court should be to put the country on a more moral path. How do you think that Robert's response to that idea should be put, and also how should it be interpreted? Should that be the role of the Supreme Court or no?
Well, Chief Robert said no, if I remember correctly, and Alito just said yes. So, yeah, at the ACA, we have several shows, and we regularly see people claiming that we get our morals from God. So it's not surprising that someone who's trying to impose his religious views believes that his morals come from God, and that because of that he has to impose them. So it's not surprising. It's terrifying that it exists at this level of responsibility and power. But the entire process is skewed now. Like, he was heard in front of the Senate before he was appointed. Amy Coney Barrett, she was heard also, and she was asked, "Do you think that Roe versus Wade is legal and should be the law?" She said yes, and everyone knew she was lying, and she was confirmed. Same thing goes with the others. So I really don't see how you can change that in the current situation and polarization of the U.S. But it has to start there. Lies have to have a consequence.
Yeah, I agree. And ultimately, a commitment to the judiciary impartiality and ethical integrity is necessary, absolutely necessary, to preserve the legitimacy of the Supreme Court. Without those things, the Supreme Court is probably going to be looked at, or actually looked at, as just a de facto institution. And we really should be pushing more so a way to actually safeguard democratic values upon the nation on which it was founded on. But one thing that you can find, dear viewer, is more videos from the nonprofits. Click here.